last week, the indescribably authoritarian judge on the Brazil Supreme Court, Alexandre de Moraes, who essentially runs the country, it's really not an exaggeration to say that, he threatened Brazilian executives with X that they would be immediately arrested if X did not instantly comply with censorship orders that had been sent to them, including to censor elected members of the Senate and the Congress. And X is reluctant to censor this because obviously these are politically motivated censorship campaigns. There's no due process provided. These people have not been convicted of any crimes. It's just this very politically motivated judge ordering these people banned from the internet with no due process. And X doesn't want to cooperate with that. And so once this threat was issued, we're going to arrest executives with X inside Brazil unless you comply. Elon Musk said, we can't guarantee the safety of our executives in Brazil any longer. And so we're closing down all offices in Brazil. We will no longer have any executives who work in Brazil because it's not safe for them to work there. And it absolutely is not. And as a result, X either separated with Brazilian executives or brought them outside of Brazil to work with X in other capacities. And now this judge, in response, is saying, either you comply with our censorship demands in 24 hours. This is the order that he issued last night. In 24 hours, you must, number one, comply with all of our censorship orders and remove these members of Congress from the internet instantly without question. And number two, you must identify an ex-representative in Brazil, physically in Brazil, because he wants to hold them hostage. He wants to order them arrested and then say they're not getting out unless X complies with these censorship demands. What person in their right mind would agree to be the ex-representative in Brazil, given this judge, unless he said X complies with those two conditions, then he will block X as a platform in all of Brazil. So anybody in Brazil will no longer be able to read X. They won't be able to participate in X. They won't be able to express themselves on X. No journalists, no politicians, no activists, nobody. X will be unavailable in Brazil except to people who have and know how to use VPNs, which scramble the location physically that you're actually in. It's used in many authoritarian countries, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, by people who want to be able to access the internet but have internet access blocked in those countries. They use VPNs to scramble where they are. That's what happens in authoritarian countries. And it's now increasingly happening in Brazil. As I think I've told you before, Rumble is banned in Brazil. And if I'm in Brazil, I'm not now, but when I am in Brazil, if I want to access the platform where my show is broadcast or see a clip from my own show, I have to use a VPN and pretend I'm in the US or Europe or in some other country. Otherwise, we'll get a notice saying this site is blocked. Here from Reuters today, quote, Brazil's top court threatens to suspend X by Thursday night. That's tonight. Quote, a Brazilian Supreme Court justice on Wednesday ordered billionaire Elon Musk to name a legal representative for his messaging platform in X in Brazil within 24 hours or face the site's suspension in the country. Early this month, X announced it would close its operations and fire its staff in Brazil due to what it called, quote, censorship orders from the judge, Alexandre de Moraes. X, at the time, claimed Moraes secretly threatened one of the country's legal representatives in Brazil with arrest if it did not comply with legal orders to take down some content from its platform. By the way, that was not a secret order. That threat was very explicit, that they would arrest executives of X in Brazil immediately if those censorship orders were not obeyed. Quote, in Wednesday's ruling, Moraes says that under the country's law regulating internet issues, companies that do not respect Brazilian legislation or the confidentiality of private information could have their activities temporarily suspended. I believe the deadline for this was 8 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock p.m. in Brazil, which is 7 o'clock Eastern here in the United States. So we'll check online to see whether or not this has already happened, but certainly the deadline has already elapsed, and a lot of people in Brazil are wondering how much longer will we have X available to us to conduct our public debates, to hear about news, to communicate, to organize. Here was the order from the STF, which is the, basically it's an acronym for the Supreme Court, the Supreme Federal Court of Brazil. There you see it's a summons, and it was posted on X, which is not even a legal order. But because there's no one in Brazil to accept this order, the STF, the Supreme Court of Brazil, just went on to X and underneath the government affairs account of X, posted what they purported to be this legal order, a summons for Elon Musk and global affairs. It says Minister Alexandre de Moraes orders the Justice Secretary of the Federal Supreme Court to notify Elon Musk by electoral means of the decision given in the above-mentioned case on August 18th, which determined the summoning within 24 hours of the name and qualification of legal representatives of ex-Brazil and national territory, duly proven with JUCESP under penalty of immediate suspension of the activities of the social network X until the court orders are effectively complied with and daily fines are paid in accordance with Article 12, Section 3 of Brazilian law. Now, in theory, let's just make this concession. If a foreign country, or foreign corporation rather, wants to operate in a certain country, it is true that in general, they have to comply with the laws of that country. And if they don't, they can be subject to punishment for violating the law like anybody else. The problem is when you have governments that are tyrannical and authoritarian and unjust and ordering political censorship, it's expected, especially for Western companies, that they're not going to comply with authoritarian regimes and shut down all opposition that's considered immoral. The Chinese demanded that of Google for a long time. Google became unavailable in China as a result. All the authoritarian countries that were taught to hate have had constant conflict with big tech over its refusal to censor dissidents or opponents of the government. And now this is contaminating the Western world as well. That's the context for all of this. It isn't as though there's somebody here convicted of pedophilia or child pornography who the Brazilian government is ordering X to ban or to take down and X is refusing. These are elected members of Congress, people democratically elected by the Brazilian people who have never been charged with crimes, let alone convicted of crimes. But this judge is simply saying, ban them, banish them from online, much as was done, let us recall, in the United States in January of 2021 to the sitting president of the United States, Donald Trump. Although in that case, that was a decision undertaken by the platforms themselves, the pre-Elon Musk Twitter era, as well as Facebook and Google. Nobody ordered them to do it. There was no government requiring it. That was a decision they made on their own, which in many ways you could argue is worse because it shows the power of big tech. But in this case, it's the government demanding it. Here is from a Brazilian newspaper today called Metropolis that is very close to Alexandre de Moraes, that is reporting on exactly what he's thinking. Quote, Moraes has already decided to ban X. He's already decided to ban X, but is still evaluating how to do it. Quote, STF Minister Alexandre de Moraes has already decided that he will vote to overthrow X in Brazil, given Elon Musk's likely failure to comply with the Supreme Court's orders. However, Moraes is still evaluating how he will formalize his decision. At the moment, Moraes is analyzing 4 different scenarios and should only make his decision official this Friday, August 30th, or during the weekend. So maybe Brazilians have a day or two left to use X while they figure out the best technical means for banning the entire social media platform from this entire large country. The first possibility is that Moraes makes a unilateral decision, does not submit it to the entire court. It is then considered the most remote option. The second would be to decide unilaterally, but take the decision to the entire court immediately so that it can be corroborated by other ministers, whether in person or virtually. Moraes already has the signal that the majority of the Supreme Court will follow him and vote for the ban of X. The other scenario is that before deciding unilaterally, Moraes takes the case to the full court to be judged in person. If that happens, the case will probably only be discussed next week. And the fourth scenario would be for Moraes to take the issue to a virtual full trial tomorrow or over the weekend. This is the hypothesis considered most likely, according to ministers interviewed by journalist Guilherme Amado. One day I'll tell you about this journalist. But he is very close to Alexandre de Moraes, often serves as his messenger in the media. And that is probably an accurate summary of what Alexandre de Moraes is planning. Not whether to ban X from Brazil, just figuring out the best way to do it. Here is from Globo, the Global magazine as well. And this is actually quite unbelievable. We have there the headline in Portuguese. So I'll just translate that for you, which is, as a result of a lack of representation in Brazil, the Supreme Court has blocked the financial resources of Starlink, a completely separate company in which Elon Musk is involved. There's no ruling that Starlink has done anything wrong. In fact, Starlink provides free internet to many of the poorest areas in Brazil. In 2022, Elon Musk was awarded all kinds of official commendations from Brazilian authorities for his benevolent act of providing free internet connection to many of the poorest areas in Brazil that the government hasn't been able to provide on their own. And yet somehow this judge, even though there's no finding that Starlink itself did anything wrong, has blocked the bank accounts of Starlink in Brazil in order to punish X. The article says, quote, this is from Globo, after X failed to submit legal representatives, FTF Minister Alexandre de Moraes blocked the financial accounts of Starlink Holding. Last week, Moraes claimed the existence of a, quote, de facto economic group under Musk's command, and on August 18th, ordered to block all of their Brazilian financial assets in order to guarantee payment of fines applied by Brazilian courts against X. Another of Elon Musk's company in the country, besides X, is Starlink, which operates in Brazil, selling satellite internet services mainly in the North region. All Starlink staff in Brazil has already been notified in order to respond for amounts to Brazilian courts owed to Brazilian courts by X. And then we have the Brazilian text here. Last week, Moraes considered the existence of a, quote, this was what I just read you that had already been translated. So I want you to see how extreme this is, because it is genuinely remarkable the lengths to which not just Brazil, but countries throughout the democratic world are now willing to go to prevent the internet from being a free exchange of ideas where human beings can organize freely and privately, because they recognize that is the one threat to establishment power and to status quo ruling class prerogatives. I've been talking about this for a long time. Until 2015, the internet was basically free. And there was obviously a lot of surveillance going on. But this form of brute censorship was not common at all. 2016 was the turning point. That was when European and American elites concluded they couldn't control people's thoughts, as evidenced by, first, the British decision to withdraw from the EU by ratifying Brexit, and then even more traumatically, from the perspective of Western liberal elites, the decision to vote for Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton and make Donald Trump president of the United States. And when they saw that, they decided that our media outlets that used to control how people think, the information they get, the kinds of opinions to which they're exposed, are no longer the gatekeepers. They lost their monopoly to the internet, to social media. And the only option we have for remaining in power to continue to be able to propagandize people and keep them in a closed information system is if we start implementing systems and justifying rationale for controlling the internet every bit as rigidly as we control large standard corporate media outlets, where most views don't get into those outlets ever. Most dissidents are never heard from. And since then, this has been a progression that is now manifesting in, I wouldn't call it yet its final form, unfortunately, but a much graver one than we've seen before. There's an article in the outlet that is called American Quarterly. There you see it on the screen, Brazil's most powerful judges in the spotlight again. And this is a magazine that is not at all on the left. If anything, it's sort of a centrist magazine. And the article was published today, and it says, quote, an escalating clash with Elon Musk and damaging revelations in the press are intensifying a long-running debate about whether Alexandre de Moraes is too powerful. Now, the press revelations that this article is referring to is the reporting I've been doing with Folha of São Paulo, the largest newspaper in Brazil, where we obtained a massive database of information, 6 gigabytes worth of messages and audios and other documents exchanged between the highest levels of Moraes' chambers among his aides that we've been reporting and revealing and disclosing, much to his extreme anger. So this article talks about the conflict with X as well as the reaction to our reporting. Quote, Moraes prevented highway police from stopping buses full of voters in an area of Brazil dominated by Lula's supporters. He also banned social media accounts of prominent figures who speculated the election had been stolen, and went after officials who failed to prevent the January 8th riot in Brasilia, even suspending the governor of Brazil's federal district from his job for 3 months. Moraes banned the social media accounts of right-wing influencers such as Rodrigo Constantino and Paulo Figueira for allegedly spreading COVID-19 misinformation and casting doubt on the Brazilian electoral system. He also banned the accounts of department store chain owner and right-wing influencer Luciana Hangui, allegedly for agitating a coup in a pro-Bolsonaro message group. Now, let me just stop there. Luciana Hangui is a multi-billionaire. He owns a huge series of department stores, a big character in Brazil. On Twitter alone, he had something like 10 million followers. On other social media outlets, he had as many, if not more. And he was a vocal supporter of Jair Bolsonaro in the 2022 election, a very influential one. And this judge, obviously doing everything he could to prevent Bolsonaro's election, just banned his social media accounts, closed them, ordered them shut to prevent him from communicating with millions of people. They remain shut to this day, even though Luciana Hangui has never been accused of a crime. Quote, blogger Alan dos Santos, in self-imposed exile in Florida, had his passport revoked after calling for the dissolution of the STF and being accused of involvement in a, quote, organized crime network that operates through monetized videos online. Quote, right now he's protecting democracy, and I think it's a very necessary thing, said Roberta Braga, executive director of the Digital Democracy Institute of the Americas, a nonprofit aimed at the digital information environment in Latin America. Quote, but you could see a world in which someone else in his role doing something in a similar, in a different context would generate a lot of problems. This is the issue. Brazilian elites are essentially saying, of course, there's too much power in his hands. Of course, he's exceeding all legal limits. But the danger of Bolsonaro's movement is so extreme, it's so criminal that we have to allow this judge basically dictatorial powers. It's the same mindset that prevailed during the war on terror in the wake of 9/11. Yes, we're running roughshod over civil liberties. We're allowing the government to spy on us, to prison us without due process. It's all necessary, even though in other contexts it wouldn't be, in order to stop the threat of terrorism. This is always the formula of every tyrannical regime everywhere. We know you like your rights. Usually we'll give them to you. But right now there's a threat posed to your safety, to the health of our nation, of our homeland, that simply doesn't allow ordinary rights to exist. It's not the first time that X would be blocked in a major country. Here from, if we can go back a little bit, Reuters in April of 2024, earlier this year, this was after the coup of the elected prime minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, which, as it turns out, shockingly, was supported by and given a green light to by the CIA, removed Imran Khan, put him in jail, installed a military regime in Pakistan, far more obedient to the U.S. security state. The social media platform X was blocked in Pakistan over national security, the ministry says. Those are the kind of countries in which these sorts of things happen. Back in 2010, as Ars Technica reported, quote, Google stops Hong Kong auto redirect as China plays hardball. Quote, under threats that the Chinese government won't renew its internet content, Google has decided to call off its efforts to redirect all China users to its Hong Kong search site. Instead of automatically sending searchers straight onto google.com.hx, the search site once again serves up a Google China homepage, complete with a faux search box image that sends users to the Hong Kong site when they click on it. The change may seem minimal, but Google hopes it will be enough to appease the Chinese government and to keep its license to operate on the internet business in the country. All these evil countries we're told are so threatening and tyrannical, now far beyond what they do. The Guardian in March of 2022, at the very start of the war in Russia, quote, Russia blocks access to Facebook and Twitter. The move to block Facebook and Twitter comes as the government passed a bill that criminalizes, quote, fake news reports against the war. What the Guardian forgot to mention was that the EU also banned Russian state media from being platformed by anybody. If you are somebody who has a social media platform and you want to give people the ability to listen to RT or Sputnik, it's against the law in the EU to do it, which is why Rumble's not available in France. Now, speaking of Rumble, the platform of Rumble is unavailable both in Brazil and France. So if you try to access Rumble while in Brazil and France and you don't use a VPN, what you get is the following, quote, and I've tried it in both countries. Quote, because of Brazilian or French government demands to remove creators from our platform, Rumble is currently unavailable in Brazil and France. We are challenging these demands and hope to restore access soon. So you see this rapidly escalating, unfolding, extremely menacing scheme of censorship, which is you either remove every dissident, every idea that we don't like, that we deem false, that we deem harmful, or we will, in the case of France, imprison you and your executives the minute you step foot into the EU, or we'll just block your entire platform from being available in our country at all. And we will only allow those platforms that maintain a closed system of information for our citizens to hear and say only what we think they should be hearing and saying. This is happening in the democratic world, the ostensibly Western democratic world. I cannot do anything more in terms of words to express how extreme, how severe, and how dangerous this trend is. We could see it coming for several years now, and it is here.
Thanks for listening to News Variable. You're officially one step closer to shedding the